Hello and welcome, everybody. Matt with Lab Stats here. We're going to give everybody just a few minutes to join. I see we've got some participants joining here, so give us just a moment while we let everyone jump on. My name is Matt. I am with the marketing team here at Lab Stats. So thank you for joining us. I truly appreciate it. I've noticed a lot of new faces in the crowd, in the registrants today. And so just a 10,000-foot view of what we do here at LabStats. We provide usage data for higher ed IT teams. Now, what does that mean? Basically, what it means is we are able to answer questions like, what computers are most valuable on campus? What is being used? What isn't being used? What software are we spending too much on? How much money are we spending on that software? We can combine our data with other data that you have already and get some really powerful answers and help people make data-driven decisions. That's what we're all about here. Now, this webinar is not a sales pitch. That's not what we're trying to do here. This is intended to be much more collaborative than that. So just kind of a quick overview of what we'll be doing today. I've got my colleague here, John. He's going to be presenting, and then at the end of that, excuse me, at the end of that, we'll have about 15 minutes or so for questions and answers. But I don't want you to hesitate to ask a question. There's a chat function here. It should be available to everyone. If it's not available, let me know and we can make some adjustments. We ran into that last time, but hopefully we've got that addressed. There's a chance we can actually answer your question on the fly while we're presenting, kind of a thing. If not, we'll address it during those last 15 minutes. And if it's a bigger question than we can answer here, we are more than happy to reach out and talk to everybody and talk to you outside of this webinar. So we'll give everybody just a few more minutes here. Let me just
Matt,
test.
I have a couple other colleagues who'd like to join
Yeah.
as viewers. Do you have a participant link or a viewer link you can send out and share?
Yep, I certainly can. Give me just a moment here. The voice you hear is John Falushko. So if you're not seeing him on screen, you will shortly. I've sent the registration link in the chat. Can everybody see that? Are you able to access the chat function? There we go. Perfect. Good to go. Perfect. That's good. That's good to see. The last time I hosted one of these, I talked up. We'll answer any questions you have. Just put them in the chat, and then never enabled the chat. So apologies for the last one, but looks like we've got that functioning properly. If you would like to invite anyone, I did include that link. You can click on that, register, and they can join here as well. Again, just a few more minutes, guys, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Perfect.
It's not a presentation by IT professionals unless there's an IT problem.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's how you know it's a professional presentation, right?
Yeah.
As if everything doesn't go quite to plan. Well, let's I want to make sure we have plenty of time to answer questions and things like that. I'm going to go ahead and unspotlight myself, so we'll see John on the screen here. Spotlight, there we go. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is John Falushko. John and I have worked together for a number of years now. We've been all over the country visiting campuses and events. Maybe we've met with you on your campus at some point. Our goal is to understand the needs and pain points and everything we possibly can about higher ed IT departments from the bottom up, from the interns to the CIO. We want to understand everything we possibly can. Earlier this year, we had a survey that went all over the world to higher ed IT departments, and we learned that the number one initiative of higher ed IT is a commitment to student success. And John has spent this last year working with schools all over the country, actually all over the world, in fact, to help them achieve those initiatives. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and turn the time over to John. We're going to start a presentation. Is it time to close computer labs? John, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. And like Matt said, totally open to any questions at any time. Is it time to close computer labs? This is a question we deal with a lot. We hear from university IT professionals and CIOs all the time. And there's some good evidence that this is the time. Let's just quickly get into this. So who am I? I'm a product manager here at LabStats. I've been a product manager for 15 years on all kinds of products, from clothing to electronic devices to software. And I've lived all over the world. You'll probably hear me reference some different places as we go. And I'm a data junkie. So let's start with data. So this is a graph for a year's worth of data up recent, to the beginning of June of this year for a major West Coast four-year university. Each one of these blue lines represents the busiest single minute of computer usage on that day for all their computers. Now, what I want you to pay attention to is the scale on the left-hand side of the graph. You'll notice this is not 0 to 100. You're seeing 0 to about 66%. The busiest single minute of usage of computers over the entire of 2024 didn't use 20% of their computers. This is absolutely typical of what we see in universities, four-year universities around the world. Now, this graph looks quite different if you're a community college. Your utilization is going to be quite a bit higher. It's going to be quite different if you drill down to a single, very specialized teaching lab. You're going to see utilization that's higher. But for the most part, for public computing labs, this is the sort of graph we see. Computers are just not very well utilized. Okay, what does that mean? Let's do some basic math. If you have 2,000 lab computers in your facility and your max concurrent usage is 20%, your unused percentage is 80%. 80% of your computers aren't needed on any given day or over the entire year. And if your average cost per computer is $2,000 for the hardware, and your replacement cycle is every 4 years, your potential annual hardware savings, you do all that math out, is $800,000 a year. Now that's just for hardware, because that's the easiest thing to sort of wrap our minds around. But actually, when we dig into it with teams and we help them analyze all their costs, they find their hardware costs are less typically than 1/5 of their total cost of maintaining that computer. The software often costs more than the hardware over a 4-year period. And the space costs, what the Brits call their estate costs, are often 2 to 3 times that. So you're paying twice as much for software and that much again, or even more, to maintain the space that computers are in. So your cost of a lab typically, on average, is uh, $5,000 to $10,000 a year per computer. You're spending a lot of money on using a lot of space on your campus, and a lot of your labor, your time and effort to keep those maintained and secure, to keep those computers up to date. So why do we still have computer labs, right? You're all very smart people working at very smart institutions. Why do these things still exist? Because modern teaching and modern education requires hardware and requires software. Teaching space with hardware and software. So there's kind of like 5 main needs I see. Take note of these. Let me know if there are other main reasons you have computer labs. But here's the main ones we hear about. You need teaching space with hardware and software similar enough for many students to execute a program of instruction taught by one instructor. If you've ever been in a situation, I'm sure many of you have as IT professionals, where you're trying to teach a new piece of software and everybody's running a different version of it on different hardware, that problem becomes much more difficult, right? Students need hardware that is powerful and ergonomic enough to perform their coursework efficiently, right? Things like a big desk, multiple monitors, a quiet place to work, a focused place to work. When we go out and survey students in computer labs, we ask, hey, why are you working in a computer lab? They're like, my dorm's just too loud. Or I live with 12 other people and I don't even have a quiet space in my house, where I live. Or I'm a single mom, the kids are home, they're with the babysitter. I need to get away from that chaos to get my work done. So it's the hardware, but also the space. Yeah, exactly. And then just the money, right? Lots of people say they have a computer, and what they have is a Chromebook. Or I was helping in one of my volunteer jobs last week, trying to help somebody set up something that we would set up in seconds, a Google form for one of my volunteer activities, and all she had access to was her smartphone. And I never tried to figure out how to configure and analyze and copy and paste to do the simple things with a Google form on just a smartphone. And so a lot of students, exactly like Quentin's mentioning, just don't have access to it. And then access to specific software, right? Not all software is available on all platforms that students might have at home. It's not available in all places. Space to do work alone or more and more in groups. My wife just went back to grad school a few years ago, and it was a grad school in the medical field, and 80% of her coursework was hybrid group work. So they had groups of people collaborating over video conferencing with needing to have several screens open to do the work. And then we have specific peripherals, large monitors, 3D printers, wheelchair accessible desks. There's a whole suite of different kinds of tech that enables student success. So there's a real need for the universities and colleges to provide technology to students. Can we meet these needs without labs or with fewer labs? It's a great question. Labs are an extremely expensive way to provide computer technology to students. How do we answer that question? By experimentation. We don't know, and no one should be prescribing to you without investigating your unique situation, whether computer labs are the right solution for you, how many you need and where. You have to experiment to find out. So can we meet these needs without labs or with fewer labs? Oh, yes, we've got that. So the stages of experimentation, this is just like middle school. When you learn the scientific method, right? We collect data, we define success, we experiment with alternatives, we track the alternatives, we compare the alternatives, we make a decision, we rinse and repeat, right? In experimentation is a continual process in any learning organization. There's a very big difference, right, between a teaching organization and a learning organization, and universities and colleges should be both. So what kind of data can we gather? And what kind of data should we gather to make a decision about computer labs? We can gather data about hardware usage, about software usage and focus time. So how much time are people actually spending interacting with particular pieces of software? We can gather data about user demographics. We can gather data about financial data. What did you spend on these resources? What did it cost you? And then sentiment analysis or qualitative research, which can become quantitative research, surveys and the like. So those are the basic kinds of data to gather to make this decision. More data allows you to answer more complex questions and drill towards more complex goals. So for example, with just usage data about hardware, I can answer questions like, are loaner laptops being used more than PCs, than boxes? If I layer on user demographics to that hardware data, I can answer questions like, do Pell Grant students who get loaner laptops get better grades? Right, I can start to drive towards a more student impactful answer. Or I can layer on financial data. What is the IT cost per GPA point for a better grade for Pell Grant students? Okay, and then we could layer that. We can say, okay, yeah, a laptop costs more than a desktop in a lab, but in a lab I have to maintain the space. So is the loaner laptop actually cheaper than that computer sitting in a lab? Is it cheaper per minute of use or cheaper per minute of GPA point impact? We start to get really complicated with the goals we drive at and the answers. Just using a few kinds of data, which you already have the demographics, you have the financial data, and if you have lab stats or one of our competitors, you have the usage data. And we can show you how to combine these data types together. Similar with software. What software isn't being used? Really basic question if you have usage data. We routinely find schools are overspending on software by millions of dollars. We have recent experience with a single institution. When they ran their usage data on Adobe, they found they only had five people using paid Adobe software in a year. They were paying Adobe for 10,000 licenses. Very typical. How much? And then you can, with user demographics plus software data, you can answer a question like, how much do passing stats students use SPSS? Stats are filter courses, right? For a lot of programs, they're the courses with the highest failure rate. Okay, can we tell students in advance, this is how much time you need to spend in your statistical software to have a decent chance of passing this course? Can we prime them in advance for how much work they needed to do? I might not be the best stats person in the world, but to pass my stats course, I was spending like 20 hours a week in SPSS to get through that course, which was actually more time than I thought I had. How many more students or tuition dollars, when you add financial data, how many more students or tuition dollars would we retain with virtual access to SPSS? We gave students the ability to use SPSS from home. Does that impact their ability to graduate? Oh, and then you can ask if they're more likely to pass that course, are they more likely to stay to graduate? What's the impact on our graduation rate or on our total revenue if we do that? And so you can start to layer in some of these more complex questions with more data. Here's an example of a question someone asked us. Is there a relationship between computer usage and GPA? And I was able to take their data from their student management system, add it to the data we had in lab stats about computer usage and see, okay, each one of these dots represents a particular student, the relationship between the number of minutes they spent logged in and what their GPA was. And we were able to find that there was a relationship between those. That relationship for the total student population was almost flat. But when we narrowed down to Pell Grant students, we found that for Pell Grant students, that relationship was positive. In other words, students using Pell Grant students who use public computers a lot got better grades. That was justification for this organization to kick off a laptop loaner program to those students. So those are the kind of examples of things you can do. And then, here's another example of just a simple way of looking at software usage. Bloomberg terminals, extremely expensive. In this case, the current application install count, or the maximum concurrent usage is 1. ArcGIS is the example on here that's a little scary. They had it installed on 1,500 computers. Only 26 students were ever using it at the same time. If they had just issued ArcGIS licenses to the students who need them, they would have saved $964,000 that year. So that's an example, just understanding your usage and how it helps you make some contextual decisions, better decisions about what to provide and where to provide it. So the next step after you started collecting the data is define success. What is success for your organization? But last time I did this presentation, I did it in person, and I asked a whole bunch of university IT folks, hey, do you have success metrics defined for your organization? And only about 10% of them put up their hands. So this is a really important first step in an experiment. We're experimenting, great. What are we experimenting towards? What is our goal? What are we trying to achieve? So for internal IT stakeholders, some examples of metrics. Maybe it's 90% max utilization of hardware. Maybe you want to say on that busiest day of the year, we want 90% of the computers to be in use. Maybe it's a count of instructor complaints, right? Everybody I've talked to gets more tickets from instructors than they get from either staff or students, which cracks me up because instructors are the smallest group on campus typically. But maybe you want to drive that number of complaints down. Maybe it's total IT budget change. Maybe you're in a school whose budget's being really challenged and you need to deal with it. Maybe it's like a lot of our UK customers over the last couple of years, as their student count has dropped and their power bills has gone way up. They've been looking to reduce the amount of square footage that the IT team takes up. So those are really good goals. With a strategic partner, so somebody even higher up in the institution, or you're partnered with institutional research, for example, you might set a goal like student retention percentage, or average GPA for Pell Grant students, or pass rates for Stats 101. That GPA for Pell Grant students, the graduation rate for Pell Grant students on the US News and World Report ranking, that is the second or third heaviest weighted variable that ranking takes into account. Many people in senior management actually have bonuses tied to your schools ranking on the US News and World Reports, seen in their publicly available contracts. So that's often a very powerful lever for you to pull. More data, more relevant metrics. So again, this shows the kinds of data and the goals. So with hardware plus usage data, you can increase your computer usage minutes. You could reduce software spend. If you layer in user demographics from your student management system, you can increase the impact of IT on GPA, increase student success pass rates. If you layer in financial data, what is the IT cost per GPA point for a better grade for Pell Grant students? Where you can provide positive ROI dollars. What did we spend on IT and what was the impact on revenue? So there's a lot of things you could get at, but even with just usage data that you get from a product like LabStats, you can get some incredible goals and incredible results. So here's some of the experiments we've supported recently. This is in sort of the category of traditional alternatives to traditional computer labs. I kind of rank these in my guess from least expensive to most expensive, but I think it differs for everybody. Collaborative and group workspaces replacing labs. We've seen this very broadly. The first place I saw it was in the UK, I believe at Northumbria, but they went through, looked at their data and said, hey, we have a whole bunch of labs with low utilization. And when we go into the labs, we see multiple students clustered around a single computer. There's actually a way, if you can get access to your IT, to your data from your Wi-Fi endpoints, often those have logs, not just of Wi-Fi devices connected, but of the Bluetooth LE devices in a room. And you can actually get a pretty accurate count of how many students are in a room. And you can compare that to your computer usage data. And what you'll find very often when you do that is that at peak periods, there's 4 or 5 times as many students in your computer labs as are using the computers. So there are people working in groups using 1, 2, 3 computers, but there's a bunch of students working together. And they're doing stuff like pulling the plugs from the other computers so that they can power their laptops and charge their phones, which if you've maintained computer labs, you've dealt with that before. So replacing traditional computer labs with group workstations or collaborative spaces often increases the utilization and increases student satisfaction. Again, in a UK example, they have a survey that goes out to all their students every year, asking a whole bunch of questions. Some of those questions involve student satisfaction with technology. And schools have found that publicizing the availability of computer labs and providing more group workstations increases the students' perception of the availability of resources, even when the resources have actually been cut. Even when they close labs, taken a lab with 30 computers and put 5 group workstations instead, students feel like that better meets their need. So the institution's costs went down, but more students' needs were met by changing the configuration. Another example, virtual desktop infrastructure. Like VDI, with VDI, like Citrix or VMware, running on bring your own device. So this says, okay, we know students have devices, they're not the right devices to do the work in all cases, but we can let them remote in to a virtual machine, which is powerful enough, which does run the right software. That's a great example. Some institutions have had great success with that. Another similar approach is virtual software, like a Porto or Apps Anywhere, running on bring your own devices. Some people have had really good success with that as a way to provide students to access to the specialized software wherever they are. The biggest trend we've seen recently is loaner laptops. So schools providing loaner laptops. I've seen in institutions around the world, lockers in the student union or in the library where students can just take their student card and borrow out a laptop and borrow them like a library book. When we've run lab stats and collected data on lab computers versus those loaner laptop programs, we see much heavier utilization on those loaner laptops. And some schools have analyzed that and found it's the students experiencing that digital poverty who are taking out these loaner laptops, and it meaningfully impacts graduation rates for those students. The ability to go and grab a machine that works, that runs, that's powerful enough, that has all the software pre-installed, that's maintained by your IT team, actually changes outcomes for students in a really meaningful way. And some institutions have, that has been so successful that they're actually moving towards one-to-one school provided student computers for certain programs, or in some cases for all programs. So those are a bunch of different experiments you can try. So let's get into the details about those. Any questions about those experiments, by the way? So was I clear on what those do and how those work? And thanks, John, for your comment. Yeah, that's very typically what we see is, and if you use the usage data to pick what you're removing, nobody even notices for the most part, because you're taking away things people weren't using. So some experiments you supported. Alternative experiment number one, loaner laptop. So what's the first step in all these experiments? You have to get baseline data. You have to begin collecting data before you start changing things. So the very first step is collect usage data from existing labs. Who's using what, where, how much, when. Determining Pell Grant students' graduation rates is the metric. This was specifically, they're trying to figure out, does this impact Pell Grant students' graduation rates as the metric? And the experiment was make 100 loaner laptops available to Pell Grant students. Then you can track that usage, track that laptop usage, compare GPAs and pass, and then you compare the GPA and pass rates against those who didn't borrow laptops. So that's a relatively simple, straightforward experiment. And again, the only tech you need is LabStats and Power BI, which is free. And on an experiment like this, myself at LabStats, any of our team on our customer support side would love to help you overcome any barriers you run into. So alternative experiment 2, group workstations, braces. So track usage in the traditional lab to create a baseline. Document all the costs of maintaining traditional labs. This is what's really important. The IT team does not bear or pay all of the costs associated with maintaining a traditional lab. One of the schools we work with in New Zealand came back to me and they said, yeah, when they ran the math, it was their space maintenance costs was well over double their hardware and software costs. So really understand that entire cost, and then define success as the lowest cost per hour of use. Hey, what does an hour of use actually cost us? You gather the usage data, you take all your costs, you divide your total cost by your total usage number, you get that hourly cost. And then set up 5 group workspaces, document all the costs. Track and tag group workstation spaces versus traditional labs, compare the alternatives. What does one cost, which one costs the least permitted usage? In terms of people doing this, one of the things I hear is IT teams, you guys are insanely busy, you're understaffed. You don't have time. So I've actually seen this run really successfully by groups of student workers. And in some cases, the IT teams has approached programs like the data science program on campus. Data science professors are super hungry for clean data sets and clear questions that they can use in their classes. And they've actually gotten the data science students to do the work as part of their coursework to generate some of these answers. So there are a lot of resources on campus to help you run these experiments. Virtual desktops. Again, you got to collect the data, usage data on traditional labs, define your success metric. So totally public use, more accessible measures that count distinct users. And like I said, any of these metrics can kind of really go with any of these experiments. But say you define it, hey, we want more people using the public computers. So then you deploy desktop virtualization, and this is the key, advertise to students. One of the things I say all the time, we have to tell people all the time, it does not matter what resources IT maintains, and provides. It matters what resources students know you have and know they can get to when you need it. I've told this story 100 times now, but a couple of years ago, myself and my boss went to go on a campus visit, and it was the last week of the semester. And there was a lineup of hundreds of students trying to get into this computer lab in the library. And that was the only computer lab you could see from outside the buildings. It was the only one that was up against a bunch of big windows. And it had hundreds of students lined up to get in to do their last minute things for the semester. Literally across the street and down a flight of steps were 150 unused computers. And then the next building over, there were another 400 unused computers. The students were standing waiting in line, not because the university didn't have the right resources, but because the students couldn't find it. If you don't advertise and publicize what you have, it doesn't matter what you have. And then you have to track those usage on the virtual machines and then compare alternatives. Was usage higher before or after virtualization? So those are my kind of 3 examples. I am not aware of anybody who's published their findings on any of these things we've helped them with. But if you contact us, I can definitely try and put you in touch with people who run experiments like this. So how are you delivering software and hardware to students now? I'd love to hear from you. Are you using loaner laptops? Are you using virtual desktops? Are you using virtual software delivery? Are you using group workstations? Love to hear what you're finding and what you're now. And then, are you running experiments in IT right now in public computing? Why or why not? What are the barriers? I'd really like to understand what are the barriers to running experiments. We're always thinking at LabStats, how do we make your life easier as higher education IT people? And the more we know about your barriers, the more we can work that into our product plan. All right, so I think we're open for questions and comments.
Perfect, John. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, guys. Any questions, any concerns? Feel free to add them to the chat. Looks like we've got quite a few, or quite a few people using that webinar chat function. John, you mentioned something interesting that makes me recall a conversation we had at SIGX maybe 2 years ago. A little bit different context, but there was a gentleman during our presentation who raised his hand and he said, "So you're telling me this isn't an IT problem, this is a marketing problem?"
Yeah.
And it was like the light bulb went off. It was like, "Oh, wait a minute. It's, we've got something else going on here." So when we, back up this presentation to the very first slide that showed peak concurrent usage, that slide that we see all over a large amount of campuses all over the world, very low utilization. Some of that might be, in fact, a marketing problem and not necessarily a resource or underutilized resources or something like that. You know what I mean? How would you go about addressing something like that? Like the reason, maybe in this lab that we're looking at here, the reason it's not being used is not because it's not needed, but because it's not known.
Yeah, so there's a couple of solutions. One is make sure your instructors are aware of what resources are available on campus. I know instructors are the hardest group to communicate with and are overwhelmed and don't do a lot of reading, but any 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 information you can get to them is great, especially contract instructors. I had in my university experience so many times when my instructor's first day on campus was the first day they started teaching. Often it was within the first hour they'd ever been on campus, they were already teaching a course. Yeah, and so getting that information out to them. We also have a product called Lab Maps, which has been proven. Again, the UK is a really good example because the government forces them to send out the same survey every year. And a Lab Maps is a simple product that you can put on a television in public spaces that just shows the number of labs that are available and the number of open computers. Deploying that product, a few computer screens, and that just comes with LabStats, and a few televisions in student unions, public rooms. I've seen it in places, cafeterias, that kind of thing, will change your students' perception of the availability on technology substantially. Survey data says 15 to 20% more presentation. So that is that's really powerful. And then the other thing is you got to message where the kids are at. SIGX had some great presentations on when they changed their messaging from email to TikTok and Instagram messaging to their students. Their messaging success rate went way, way up. So, you have to communicate where the people are. One of the things I always like to remind IT professionals is the majority of your students access the internet almost exclusively through apps on their phone. They almost never even open a browser. So if you haven't figured out how to get your message in the app people use, it's not going to get through. I'm just looking through some of the, you want to read some of the questions, Matt?
Yeah, John. Michael brings up an interesting point about barriers coming from upper management. That's something we've dealt with before. We went to a school in California, met with the CIO about his concerns, and some of the reasons why there might be hesitation to move forward. Michael specifically says kind of all or nothing type solutions. I believe, and John, maybe you can add some context to this, but in my experience working with the C-suite folks, that upper management level, it comes down to data. Nobody wants to stick out their neck with a great big question mark attached to it. So if you have the data to back up the decision to move forward, to make that data-driven decision, I think that barrier might be something that can be alleviated. What do you think, John?
Yeah, absolutely. The experiments, get with us, talk with us, reach out to me. You can reach out to me at my email, just john@labstats.com. And, we can help you talk about the scale of an experiment and what an experiment would look like. But most of the experiments we run with people are cost neutral or very low cost. You can run an experiment, convert a lab to a group space using furniture and stuff you already have, and start running that experiment at zero cost and prove it gradually. We're not asking anybody to radically, change your budget and come in and say, hey, we need a 50% budget increase next year. Most of these experiments can be run in a cost neutral fashion. And that's what gets that's what gets management on board. And that's where it's important to pull in all of the costs associated, from the maintenance, the power, the heating, insurance. Every cost you can get really helps you understand the entire picture and helps you build cost neutral or actually cost saving change. So Carlos, you can reach out to me at john@labstats.com. You can reach out to sales@labstats.com. We will be in touch, or just leave your email in the chat, or direct. I think you can direct message in this.
We can, Carlos. Carlos is asking about setting up a public space and wanting to do some experimentation there. That's certainly something we can help you with, Carlos. We'll reach out because you've registered here. We've got your contact information. So as long as the email that you use to register for the webinar is accurate, we can we'll go ahead and reach out and see how we can help you there, because that's exactly the stuff we're talking about.
And then, Quentin, we have separate logs for the power sessions on the computer and the user sessions on computers. And we can show you how to compare those data sets and say, yep, these machines were turned on, and these ones were the ones where these were the times when users were logged on. And then we have even more specific data about software that was run. And then even more specific, what percentage of that time when the software was being run was it actually in focus? So we can really help you drill down to the difference between computer switched on, we call that a power session. A user logged in, call that a user session, and then active use. So John Lawrence, I think that answers your question as well. I would use a combination of software and active time. And there's a little algorithm I built for an experiment. We can help you sort those. And then the Lab Find app. So Lab Find app was one of our experiments that was a failure. And why it was a failure is students just flat out refused to download the app. We had a couple campuses push it out to tens of thousands of students, and we ended up with less than 5 active users. So we've built out our API in such a way that you can now, with some coding, get Lab Find type features built into your existing campus app. And we think that's probably going to be the better way to do that. Yeah, and then the comment about it's not allowed to remove any in-person labs. Yep. And it often takes a crisis to actually get changed in an institution. I know that's shocking to some of you. Yeah, everybody needs a crisis to actually make change. Nobody likes change.
So we were talking about kind of a marketing problem earlier. Sam brings that up in kind of a unique way, but we've seen this before. Basically, what Sam is saying here with this question is the prestige of having these labs with these state of the art, you know, the state of the art hardware, whatever the visibility there is worth something to some people, not necessarily the IT folks and the people maintaining those computers and people tasked with giving students access to what they need, but maybe more like a recruiting office or something like that, right? My thoughts on that, and John, again, you could add color to this, but my thoughts are this computer lab is now functioning as something different. And consequently, budget ought to be coming from the marketing department. From
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. I was like, hey, marketing, if you want this lab so bad, why don't you pay for it? You have more money than we do anyway.
Right, right. So Sam, that would probably be the route that I would go. With some usage data, you could show that, you know, these labs in this, maybe, I mean, it varies wildly depending on the institution. But if this is something that your students are not getting value out of, with usage data, you could easily see that and then say, you know, that I don't want to pay for that. Let's have this come from a marketing budget or something along those lines.
Yeah. Yes, the lab stats runs on almost every VDI we've ever tested on. We can find a configuration to get it to run. I don't like to say everyone because there's always more that we've run into. I think Amazon was offering a VDI product for a while that we could not figure out how to run, but I don't think that product exists anymore. So Wayne, every VDI that I know of that's on the market, we can figure out how to make it run. And then Michael, about the software. So there's a couple of different ways to look at that software. One is to just get a list. In fact, I was able to use one of the large language models recently to scrape a university's syllabuses and get a list of the software mentioned in the syllabus. And I said, okay, that's probably the most important software. And I can show you how I did that. And then we basically created a filter for those software titles, the ones that were mentioned by name in the syllabuses, and said, this is the usage on that of those titles. And then you can specifically filter down. We can show you how to import the list of what major students are enrolled in into the lab stats and filter down and say, okay, the engineering professors say that they are teaching this software. Let's look at the usage of those titles by people enrolled in engineering. And then drill it down, and then you can even drill down further into like the specific teaching classrooms or teaching computers. Get with me and we'll help you get to those answers. We can show you how to get to there.
Looks like we got a shout out from Jake for the lab stats support team. Yet again, one of our most celebrated teams. We have had
D&D or D&D, as we lovingly call them, are awesome.
Yes. Yep. So if you have any questions on support, our support team has been very well celebrated. Every event that John and I attend, inevitably somebody brings it up, or in this case here. So Jake, I'm glad that's your experience as well. You know, John, it looks like Frank had a question here that I don't know if I can answer very well.
What do the teachers actually need? One of the best things you can do is get the course calendar and start digging in on the specific rooms and places that the instructors say that they're teaching in. And be like, hey, did that actually get used? I was recently helping somebody with this. It was a very specialized lab, very high-end computers. The attendance record said that the course was very full. But when we looked at the computer usage, it was like 10% of the students who were marked as attending were actually logged into the computers. And less than that were actually using the software that the instructor said they were teaching. So what the instructor thinks they need and what the usage actually is are often quite different. My personal thing is teaching labs being used for actually teaching when their course is actually enrolled in them would probably be the last thing I'd cut. But I've seen cases where it literally made sense to just have loaner laptops instead of those teaching labs. And people have moved to that and had really successful students. Do we have any resources or documentation for using Power BI with lab stats data? Yes, we absolutely do. We also offer free consulting and training line. So you can reach out with your specific questions and we'll show you how to get those answers. And then Matt can get you the links for the instruction and training.
Yeah. So Wayne, the Power BI. So let me just tell you, as someone who is not in higher ed IT, Power BI was kind of an
it has a learning cliff, not a learning curve.
Yeah, exactly. But I will say, John, one of those resources that we have, and I'm not trying to turn this into a sales pitch. That's not the point of this webinar. But we do have templates that automatically populate with your data, and then you can manipulate those as you will. So if you're not Power BI savvy like I was not, the out of the box Power BI templates that we provide are very much so kind of a click, fill in the blank kind of situation, and you're getting some really powerful insights very, very quickly. So that's one resource. But then we do have more documentation beyond that if you're looking for something beyond what is just available in the templates.
I 100% agree. I was doing some testing on a customer's computers the other day, their system, and we found some Windows 7 computers still deployed in their environment. And I reached out and I was like, hey, do you know those are there? Like, do we have a bug that's misreporting the OS that's installed? And they're like, nah, we have this instructor who has this one piece of custom software we wrote to teach a course that will only run on Windows 7. And so we have a lab full of Windows 7 machines to run that on. Yeah, which just blew my mind.
So Tom, now I'm part of the marketing team, so I look at everything with kind of a marketing spin, and I see your issue here. IT is generally looked at to resolve everyone's issues. Yeah, John and I have seen that all over the place. It's very, very common that IT is kind of the last line of defense for every issue possible. My solution to that problem, and not that it would be a solution, but it might be a way to start start going down this road, is to tie your efforts directly to student success or student outcomes or something like that. And then when you have pressure to take care of other problems that are not directly tied to student success or student outcomes or whatever is most important on your campus, you can clearly show, like, hey, this is our top priority. We can sprinkle this in with interns or wherever else we can help, but we don't want to forego our top priority for something that is not our top priority. So again, kind of a marketing problem.
And then the order of operations really, and it sounds like I'm being self-serving here, but the more data you have, the easier those conversations get. So the very first step is make sure you're collecting and saving the right data, and then start having the conversations about, okay, what the heck are we trying to achieve? What does success look like for us? Because every time you come up with a proposal, people will ask about, well, what about last year? Was this true last year? Right? Was this year 5 years ago? And you're like, I wish I had more data. So, start collecting the data. It will help. People have lots and lots and lots of feelings in every single institution, not just higher education. But if you consistently make data-driven arguments, you'll often win. you'll often get to better decisions.
And and you know, John, it's only self-serving in one way, because the more lab stats clients are deployed, the more efficient people can run their labs, right?
Yeah.
We've run into that before, where people mentioned that we're kind of working ourselves out of a job, right? Or at
Yep.
least, but we've learned that the people who deploy the most, they have the most complete picture of their campus IT environment, are the ones that get the most benefit.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, any other questions, guys? We've got just a couple minutes left here. Any other questions before we sign off? By the way, guys, this is being recorded, and everybody who registered will get an email with a link to the video. So if your question, if there was something that you wanted to, visit again or whatever, you will have that. Just another shout out. There we go again. To D&D, our support team, very, very celebrated with lab stats. We're always happy to see that. So again, Cheryl, glad that's your experience as well.
And you're free to share the recording with whoever you like.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
please do. Yeah, anyone. It'll also be likely, we may trim it up and stuff, but this will likely be posted to our social media channels and video service streaming services, YouTube or wherever else. So okay. All right. Well, I think if we've answered everybody's questions, we'll go ahead and call it. Guys, thank you so much for being here and joining us today on this webinar. John, thank you for your presentation and insights. We truly appreciate you. And without any further ado, we'll go ahead and call it. Guys, we will see you next time. Keep an eye on those inbox for invites for future webinars. We've got some really exciting stuff planned. It's already shipped, a lot of it actually. We're just going to be talking about that over the next couple webinars. So thank you for being here. See you at EDUCAUSE. Sounds good, Marvin. Appreciate it. We'll see you there. All right, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and we'll help you the best we can. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.